Um, what I wanted to do was, I want to start with, I don't know if some of you remember, but Kath Kopetsky some weeks ago put up So Will I, that Hillsong song about the 100 billion galaxies are formed at his breath song. And I've just been playing it over and over. It so touched me, particularly the one with the graphics of all the flying through space and other stuff. It's a very clever song in the way that it builds. It makes analogy with the numbers of the so will I follow, or whatever. But there's one bit where it gets to say that it plays around with the billion idea in a number of ways. A billion offenses forgiven and 100 billion galaxies created, or whatever. There's one part where it says 8 billion places that we see his face, talking about people, and we see a flashing of lots and lots and lots of faces. And when I saw that, I was confronted with my own selfishness, at my own lack of going out to other people, and my own self-containedness. And the Lord took me to the parable of the Good Samaritan, because I wanted to look at that. Because in some ways, you know the story well. A man on his way from Jerusalem down to Jericho gets robbed and beaten up and is left there. And the priest and the Levite, when they see him, they look and they make a decision and they pass by on the other side. And if I'm to be honest, sometimes I felt more like the priest or the Levite than the Good Samaritan. In fact, much, much, much to my shame, although there's no shame in the kingdom. I remember in London, there was an incident. You know, we get so busy, so preoccupied. We've got our schedule. We don't want to be inconvenienced. There on Tottenham Court Road, someone that was perhaps a street person or whatever, virtually collapsed. It wasn't quite in front of me. There are other people closer than I was, so I could excuse myself, but literally was in front of me. And I walked by on the other side. I thought, oh, well, they can deal with that. I'm so busy and it's nothing to do with me or whatever. And just moments later, I caught myself. And I thought, wow, I'm calling myself a Christian leader. And yet it's so easy to insulate ourselves from the pain that is all around us. So I went into this parable to look, and I'm thinking, well, what's the difference between the Good Samaritan and these other two? The NIV says that when the Good Samaritan saw him, he took pity on him. Perhaps not a brilliant translation. The NASB is a good one, or the NLT talked about the fact that he felt compassion. That word compassion with passion, it's the root of where we get the word patient, or the one that was suffered. So with the one that suffered, felt something of the pain of the person. The New Testament for Everyone, that's a new translation by N.T. Wright. I haven't read it much, but it will be good. It said that he was filled with pity. The Passion Translation is beautiful. It said he was moved with tender compassion. He was moved with tender compassion. The Amplified, he was deeply moved with compassion for him. Or the Message is really lovely as well. His heart went out to him. Then the word, get ready for this, splanknidzume, it's got zoom in there, has got that sense. The root of it is in the word guts. That's a polite way of what it really is, but that's the sense. It's something from the inside that gets touched. It's a gut-wrenching moment. It's not just that, oh, he sort of took pity at someone at a distance, but the Good Samaritan saw, and something happened to him. He felt something at a deep level, and he went, like that. It was like a movement. I've felt this a couple of times. There was a guy called Sean in our life group back in London. He was sort of a homeless guy. He got saved. Many needs. Lovely guy, beautiful personality. But there was one evening where he was just sitting there. We were in group or whatever, and I just saw him. I mean, we'd been together all evening, but I saw him, and I saw his vulnerability. I saw his need, and something in me was splanknidzumed. Something in me was gut wrenched. Something in me took pity. Was moved with compassion. I felt this kind of about it. Maybe that doesn't translate well, but I'm just trying to explain what the word is. There's another guy, some of you might have met, called Samuel. Now, we all adore Samuel. Samuel is a beautiful, beautiful, lovely, shining Christian man. But when we met him, he was a recluse, really. He lives in the smallest bedsit in London. It's in Pimlico. He's too ashamed even to show it to me. And he'd had a nervous breakdown many, many decades before. And his life consisted of moving between the aforementioned smallest bedsit in London and the laundrette and the library. And that was his existence. He spoke with no one. One of our congregation sort of approached him in the laundrette, invited him on Alpha, wasn't interested. So not to be put off, she asked him the next year. Sometimes these things take a little long time. And he came. Maybe it was the food, I don't know. He came. But he got radically saved, and he started to get transformed, and he got a haircut, and he started coming to church. He'd never come to a church lunch because that was too intimidating. So dear Chrissy would plate him up a plate of food and oh, Samuel, take this with you. And he'd sort of linger at the door eating his food because he was too not able to come into the full thing, but not wanting to leave. And by the time we left, Samuel's diary was maxed out. He had lunch dates. He was doing Zumba classes. He was running our IT. Everybody adored him. But this guy, similarly with Sean, there was one evening we were sitting in our room, and we knew this guy well, but there was something, as I looked at him and I saw his vulnerability, I was splanknid-zoomed. There was something in me that went, oh, and I felt, it was almost like I saw him. I mean, this might sound arrogant to say, but it's the closest I can. It was almost like I had Father's heart for him. I saw him how Father saw him, and my heart just went out to him. Now, why am I sharing all this with you? It's because I really sense that we are moving into a new season of signs, wonders, miracles, healings. It's been prophesied so many times. And as we take it and believe it and pray it in, we're going to see it more and more and more. We've already this week had testimonies of God moving in a supernatural way. And I love all that stuff. But I was just interested in what this guy did that moved him from my natural, which is to pass by on the other side, to the where I want to be, where I move in. And for this guy, it was this process of letting the walls of self-protection come down and allowing him to see the man and to feel, and that compassion caused him to operate. So I looked at this word. With Bible search, it's very easy. It happens 12 times. The word is used 12 times in the New Testament. And I thought, well, where else is it used? Now, if you've ever been to Sunday school, you'll know it doesn't matter what the question is. The answer is always Jesus. And it was Jesus that was splanknid-zoomed. In Matthew 9, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. It was like the precursor for the teaching, preaching, and the healing every disease and sickness. Jesus was moved deeply. Sorry, sweetie, it's very, he was moved really, really deeply. In Matthew 14, when he had heard the news of John the Baptist having been killed, he went away to a solitary place, presumably to mourn. But when he arrived, the crowds were there. And it says, when he saw the crowds, something in him, he was moved with compassion, and he healed their sick, and later he fed them. In Matthew 20 and 34, two blind men, or one if you're in Luke, pursue him and ask, for healing. And before, he doesn't just move in power or authority or word of knowledge. Before any of that happened, there was something in Jesus. It said that he took pity on him. He was moved with compassion. Mark 1, similarly, a man with leprosy. He doesn't just see another person to be healed, but when he sees the man, he sees the isolation, he sees the pain, he sees the sickness. And Jesus himself was moved with compassion. The widow's son, Luke 7, same thing. His heart went out to him. Interestingly, when Jesus explains what the Father's love is like in the story of the prodigal son returns. He's behaved appallingly. The father doesn't say, you've really offended stuff. You've really acted in a way which is going to need recompense. We're really going to have payment for this. We're going to have to address this. Otherwise, our whole social order is going to break down. Someone somewhere needs to pay for this, to be punished for that. He doesn't say any of that. He is splaghnid zoomade. He is moved with compassion. His gut is affected, and he sees his son, and he runs with love over his son. And the reason I want to talk about this is because when we're seeing the signs and the wonders and the miracles, I want it to come with a hallmark of people that care, who have taken their protection down and their walls down. Because for Jesus, it wasn't just he moved in authority and just knew who he was, but he got involved in a heart-wrenching way, which in somehow enabled the miracles. Let's go back to the priest and the Levites. Sure, they saved some time. They were not inconvenienced, and that's it. We want to protect in a broken, hurting world. Brokenness is not attractive. We want to insulate ourselves from it. We want to pull back. We want to pretend we didn't even see, and we walk past on the other side. He did save a bit of time, but what also did they get? I suspect when they agreed with that voice that said, look after yourself, that is based, Bill Johnson says, every action is either based in fear or love. I think there was a bit of fear in them. Fear of getting their time taken from them. Fear of getting their resources taken from them. They've been up to Jerusalem, they're clear. Fear of getting ceremonially unclean again by getting involved with that which was dirty. And when you agree with fear, then it gets stronger. And I suspect it was probably suppressed fear because they didn't even want to admit to themselves, and anxiety comes in on the back of it. And perhaps because they're priests and Levites, maybe a bit of guilt as well that they didn't even want to admit. And so they walked away from that incident, having saved themselves from getting dirty, having saved any expense, having saved their time, with perhaps, and this is conjecture, but having perhaps strengthened their own anxiety, strengthened their own guilt, strengthened the pressures that is sort of insidious there for all of them, for all of us. The Good Samaritan didn't have anything taken from him because he chose to give. What did that do for him? Well, he saw someone that was broken and in desperate state made whole again. What did that make him feel? Did that make him feel like a powerful person that could influence? He didn't do all of it. Sometimes we don't have to be everything to everyone. He delegates some of the work to the innkeeper and is happy to pay for it or whatever. It doesn't mean to say when we let the world in, we just need to be a doormat and let everything just wash over us so we're subsumed. But he took a stand to say, actually, I can intervene. I'm not going to be taken from. I'm not going to walk past on the other side. Something of my heart has gone out to this man. I've been moved deeply and I can act. And I feel when we do this, we become stronger. We become more the people we intended us to be. Jesus says that in Matthew 16 and 25, whoever wants to save his life, look after his life, insulate his life from the pain, distance himself from the problems, look after himself, will lose it anyway. One of my friends from London says that money builds walls. We can look after ourselves and protect ourselves, and we just end up isolating ourselves from each other. But Jesus went on to say, but whoever loses his life for my sake will gain it. Gain a real identity. Gain an inheritance in the kingdom of God. Gain an inheritance as a co-heir with Christ, who's blessed in the heavenly realms with every spiritual blessing. Isn't that worth taking our walls down a bit? Isn't that worth being willing to feel a bit, to have compassion a bit, to take pity a bit, not to insulate ourselves, but to go to the hurting, to go to the broken. Sometimes it doesn't always mean just the destitute and those without money. Sometimes the hurting and the broken are in our own families, our own children sometimes, our own relatives or neighbors. Jesus used this story to talk about who was our neighbor. But people, yes, it would be marvelous and wonderful, and we are being a people of authority and of power and of healing and of testimony. But Jesus did this stuff not just because he was the Son of God, because he was a man who was moved with compassion, who felt stuff deeply, who was able to associate with that was lost. There was a time many, many years ago when I was in the prayer room at Ichthus Christian Fellowship, and I was just contemplating the what had happened on the cross for me personally. This is going to be one of these stories that perhaps doesn't translate well. These things which perhaps happen to us spiritually, sometimes difficult to describe. But let me put it like this. I was considering what had Jesus done on the cross for me. And it was like I was back at school and I was outside a room where the headmaster was talking in quiet tones to my parents about something that perhaps I'd caused or whatever, but it was almost too much for me to fully appraise of what had happened, but measures had been taken to put it right. That's the impression I got. There was something that was of such high magnitude that I was being protected from ever knowing quite how bad the situation had been, but suffice it to know that it had been taken care of. Jesus had compassion, took pity, was moved, not because he was God and he saw you as another number, but he saw you, he saw your life, he saw what life without his salvation would look like, and he was moved deeply, and it took him to associate with that brokenness so much that he went to the cross and he who knew no sin became sin. He took the consequences, the brokenness, the filth, the depravity of the world. He took it onto himself. He associated with it. He went right into death in order that his purity, his goodness would break its power once and for all. And the shackles of addiction, the shackles of sin, the shackles of death could be broken once and for all. And he is now not a beaten, bloodied body, but he is the resplendent King of Kings and Lord of Lords, surrounded by angels, worshiping him forever and ever and ever, and pouring out the very Spirit that he worked by into his new body on church, the Christian Church of Jesus Christ. Us people, we carry that same Spirit, and we are to be moved with the same compassion. Will you join me this morning in taking down the walls, allowing his Spirit to work through us, so we're not like the priest and the Levite, relying on what we can or can't do, but we're opening ourselves to the resources of heaven, the very Spirit of God, the healing power of God, to flow through us, to become the powerful people that don't have to walk by on the other side, but can say, we can get involved with brokenness, we can get involved with things that aren't right, even if it's with rebellion and arrogance and money, that's still brokenness. We can get involved with that and see its power broken in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.